Hello viewers, I'm Daniel Kasahun with this edition of Addis Dialogue broadcasting to you on ETV language. In this edition, we discuss some issues with regard to the Nile Basin, why it has become a bone of contention between the riparian countries, particularly between Ethiopia and Egypt. We learn scholarly views about the Nile Basin from Mr. Zerihun Abebe. He is a diplomat from the Ethiopian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for having me.
We have the 1929 agreement between the United Kingdom and Egypt in the Nile Basin. And also we have the 1959 agreement between Egypt and Sudan on the water sharing agreement. How did you find this agreement? Was it fair, neglecting the other riparian countries and making that agreement?
Thank you, Daniel. A very interesting question, actually. The 1929 exchange of notes between the United Kingdom and Egypt, I think we can refer it as an exchange of notes between the United Kingdom and the United Kingdom, rather than saying kind of agreement entered between two sovereign and independent nations. We can't say that, actually. The reason being, at that time, the United Kingdom had its heavy influence in Egypt. Egypt was believed to be independent in 1922, but we have the heavy hand from the United Kingdom at the time, and scholars say Egypt was not independent until 1952. So the Great Britain entered into that agreement to make sure the uninterrupted flow of the Nile reaching Egypt, because Egypt at that time was the source of raw material for the United Kingdom, especially cotton for its textile factories in Manchester. Therefore, the United Kingdom was trying to make sure that its colonies in the water source countries in the upstream of the Nile are not engaged themselves in any kind of activity that decreases the flow of the Nile reaching Egypt. So it is an agreement entered between two, not two sovereign countries, but one country. That's how we see it. And whether it was fair or unfair, it was unfair.
Which one is the Egyptians referring their historical right?
Historical rights, that is non-existent, actually. In international law, it doesn't exist. And the Egyptians claim that they have historic right over the Nile. If that's the case, the Ethiopians and other upstream countries have natural right, which is much bigger, much broader, and much sound than the so-called historic rights. We have a natural right. The river is flowing through my door, and I have each and every right to utilize. So the so-called historic right is non-existent, as I said. For Egypt, what they call a historic right is based on the 1929 exchange of notes and the 1959 agreement. And that is colonial-based. And it is saddening, to be honest, a sovereign and independent country like Egypt, and with its history and civilization leaning on a colonial treaty, rather than looking at eye to eye with its African brothers and sisters in the upstream and entered into very sound and formidable and very, really reliable agreement, like the Cooperative Framework Agreement. And unfortunately, the Egyptians are tying themselves. And if you look at their constitution under Article 44, they have what they call their historic right on the Nile. That's laughable. And the constitution obliged the government to protect the Nile and to protect Egypt's historic right on the Nile. And that is really, really saddening. Not for us, but for the Egyptians themselves.
Do you see any possibility among the Egyptians to revisit their constitution and rewrite it?
It is up to the Egyptians to be self-reflective and to look into inside and to live up to the 21st century. The so-called historic right, as I said, is something just as if that country is leaning on colonial agreement, and that's not helpful. That's not a civilized way of dealing with differences with neighbors. You can't say this water is mine while there are other 9 riparian countries or 10 riparian countries who are sharing it. Egypt contributes 0% to the flow of the Nile. And Egypt wants us to, maintain a historic wrong that its leaders entered into in the 1920s and in the 1950s. By the way, in the 1950s, Emperor Haile Selassie tried to approach Gamal Abdel Nasser. And he was saying, let us enter into agreement together as brothers and sisters in the Nile. And Gamal Abdel Nasser declined the request of His Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie. That's a lost opportunity for the Nile Basin and a lost opportunity for Egypt. For Ethiopia, it's okay, we're fine. Because no agreement entered between any country, whether it's a colonial power or African country like Egypt, is not prohibiting us from utilizing our water resources. And that's a historic wrong. And I hope with time and knowing, a lot of things are changing on the ground. Ethiopia has built many dams in the Nile Basin, like the Takazi, the Tanabeles, the Fincha, the Koga, and now the Grand Ethiopian Renicance Dam and other projects are on the pipeline. So knowing this fact and knowing cooperation is in their best interest, I hope the Egyptians will come to their senses and live up to the 21st century and, throw away what they call is a historic right and enter into modern international water law, and which is based on equitable and reasonable utilization, no significant harm, and cooperation. And negotiating in good faith is really important. And we have actually a negotiated outcome, and that's the cooperative framework.
And for sure, their claim of historic rights is against the international water law.
Yeah.
How do you express their claim with the international courts?
Yeah, these two are, just on two opposite sides. Egypt, I have said it before, Egypt is trying to sail against the wind. They're trying to sail that way. And they are trying to sail against the storm, and that is very difficult. Modern international law is for cooperation, for equitable and reasonable utilization, and for no significant harm, and for resolving differences or disputes or disagreements based on negotiations in good faith. That's the most important thing.
In the Nile Basin, we find, I think, around 11 countries in the course of the Nile Basin. They are determined to cooperate for equitable utilization of the Nile water under the framework of the Cooperative Framework Agreement. Many countries have signed it and ratified it. Egypt and Sudan, they're against. Still now, they haven't signed it. They don't want to ratify it. Particularly, let's say, in connection to Egypt. What if Egypt persists in denying all these factors? What will be the outcome in the coming years?
Well, if you look at the Cooperative Framework Agreement, I said it was negotiated by all the basin countries. Eritrea was an observer, of course, and South Sudan was not independent at that time. South Sudan achieved its independence in 2011. All the countries, all the 9 countries negotiated the Cooperative Framework Agreement, including Egypt. And actually, the vote of thanks, while the negotiation was concluded in 2007, the first phase, it was the then Minister of Water and Irrigation, Mohammed Abu Zaid, who gave the vote of thanks in Entebbe. He acclaimed and thanked the negotiating team of the Nile Basin countries and appreciated the work done. But only one sub-article was the difference. If you look at the Cooperative Framework Agreement, it is all about the management, the cooperative management and utilization of the Nile waters. It is for cooperation. And it clearly states is each and every riparian country of the Nile had the right to utilize the waters of the Nile in its territory, in its jurisdiction, in an equitable and reasonable manner. But while doing so, they must make sure that they are not causing significant harm. The only way to make sure that the utilization of the river by one particular country is not causing significant harm is when you ensure the equitable and reasonable utilization of the river. That's most important. That's the cornerstone.
Let's come to the commencement of the Grand Ethiopian Renicance Dam. I think it was in 2011.
Yes.
Can we say it as a game changer in the Nile Basin?
Yeah. It is indeed. Actually, the construction was commenced in 2010, and the contract was the official commencement of the construction of the dam on the 2nd of April 2011. But if you look at the contract signed between the government of Ethiopia and Salini Impregilo, which is the main contractor of the dam, it was commenced in 2010. The GERD is a game changer, yes, and it is. You know, Ethiopia conceived construction of dams in the Blue Nile long ago. It was in 1925, actually.
During the reign of Emperor Haile Selassie.
Emperor Haile Selassie. Yeah. In Haile Selassie first commissioned a study in cooperation with the United States Bureau of Reclamation. And 32 projects were identified in the Blue Nile Basin only, not in the Takeze, not including the Barwakobo, which is in the Nile system, only in the Abebe Gorge, only in the Abebe Basin. And 32 projects were planned and identified. And one of the projects identified at that time was the border dam, now what we call is the Grand Ethiopian Renicance Dam. And there are also other 3 projects behind this dam, actually. And for long, it was only Fincha was implemented out of the 32 projects. And the GERD was commenced, and it's a game changer for many reasons. One, it is the biggest dam in the Nile Basin, as I said, and it will produce a huge amount of energy, like more than 15,000 gigawatt hour per year, which is huge, and it will help us to electrify our country. By now we have more than 65 million people without access to electricity. We'll change that. Second, it is very important for the region. Apart from benefiting Ethiopia, beyond benefiting Ethiopia and Ethiopians, it is implication and its significance is to the region and to the world, actually. How? First, it will serve the region by facilitating energy-led integration. That's really important. Our grids are interconnected with Sudan, with Djibouti, with Kenya now, and now with South Sudan. It will be commenced soon, and we are also in discussion with Tanzania, Rwanda, and Uganda. So it will provide affordable energy, and it will facilitate regional integration. Third, it will also provide more water. You know, having another dam in the system means having more water. You will save water. It is like a water bank, and it will serve downstream countries during drought as well. And another most important benefit is it will uplift the energy in Sudan. Sudan will get, without adding a single turbine, without building any dam, just by maintaining and increasing the efficiency of their dams, Sudan can get the energy that we are